view, these axes of influence in our societies all find legitimacy in a homogeneity of values and practices. They all have a concern with everybody agreeing entirely with what they say and acting based on that, as opposed to the desirable impact of diversity and pluralism. All seek monopoly status. They thrive on a lack of diversity. The real challenge, and I think this is even more fundamental than the question we're addressing, which is one function or outcome of that dynamic, the real challenge, in my view, involves our liberation from these strangleholds. Again, that's another forum, I suppose, at another time, but it's a view that I've held for some time now, and I think that our societies need to take a dispassionate look at that. Who really holds this hegemonic control, or would like to hold, to monopolize the way we think about the world and the way we see things in the world? And what do we do about it? But let's look at the business environment. It is, notwithstanding what I've said about the fact that there is not really, in my view, if you take a reality check on who are the media in the Caribbean, I don't think there's a really valid concern that in most instances there is going to be this dominance by a single view and by a single way of approaching relations in our countries. But it is important that commercial and economic relations ought not to be distorted by inequitable arrangements regarding the allocation of broadcasting spectrum, which we all recognize as a public good that cannot be thrown willy-nilly into the marketplace without careful thought and consideration and without some level of regulation. And incidentally, the organization that I represent favors less regulation rather than more regulation, because we believe that freedom of expression is what is going to take us to the next level of our independence and our viability, in a sense, as civilizations in the Caribbean. Not more control. There is a sort of knee-jerk response most of our societies have to things that happen around us, and it comes perhaps from our colonial past, where the first resort is an attempt to control and to manipulate, as opposed to creating an enabling environment for all ideas, all opinions, and all sources of news and information to prevail. So you don't want, however, in small markets, too many diamonds in a single basket. So most of our countries need to get more serious about antitrust or anti-competition legislation, which defies traditional uncompetitive commercial relations in our small countries. Because traditionally, the business environment was characterized by monopoly status. The colonials came and they set up their business, and they set it up such that we would never become serious players in our own spaces. And they had a vested interest in securing monopoly status and control. So we in turn now that we are ostensibly in charge, we need to ensure that we defy this traditional adverse reaction to opening up our economies. While at the same time, even as we do that, we need to be careful that we don't stifle enterprise and we don't quell or put down meaningful alliances that may emerge. And I'm going to come to speak about that a little bit more when I look at Jamaica as a case study. However much we talk about it in Trinidad and Tobago, there are two major media conglomerates but no real dominance to create conditions for real concern about an absence of diversity or plurality. Good to see Dr. Dunn here. Good evening, good afternoon. And as a regulator, he's coming in at the right time, because I was making the point that even in Trinidad and Tobago, where we do have these two huge conglomerates with media investments, when you look at it, there's really no dominance. The dominance is not such that there are real concerns about an absence of diversity or plurality as a result of they being there. The open market, facilitated by the advent of more and more online media alternatives, has contributed toward a much more rigorous marketplace of news, information, and opinion than ever existed before. And my view is that freedom of expression should prevail on all these fronts. As I said before, in the sanctity of a hall minus Dr. Dunn, my position is that the less regulation, the better. Because we need to create an environment in which people are free to express themselves. Of course, freedom of expression is one of these derogable rights, the lawyers would tell us, that's subject to conditions. And even if you go back to Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you will see that there are acceptable derogations. And the state is entitled to act in a regulatory capacity to ensure that people's expressions, as free as they are, do not cause harm. And the state is entitled to make the judgment call in that regard. So I'm not at all saying that I'm anti all regulation. I mean, I am in favor of the abolition of all forms of censorship. But that, like the previous statement I made, is something that can be subject to a bigger debate at another time and another place. To me, the essential challenges that have to do with a capacity to speak truth, not only to those in power, but those who provide the circumstances for the accumulation of power through media capable of capturing it within the framework, Yeah. Okay, I have a page issue here. Yes. Right. You know, one of the things that we need to be very careful about is imposing regimes of culturally specific value systems. In the Caribbean, we have a habit of saying, well, you know, we really shouldn't be saying this or doing this because we're too small, or we're too poor, or we're too remote. I don't think the people can handle this. So let's pull this back. So I'm not speaking about culturally specific value systems in the delivery of journalistic services, because such a formulation frequently suggests a level of self-censorship and relativism on questions of human rights and values and freedoms. We don't want an environment in which there is space for compromise on people's rights and freedoms. And we can go into another tangent if you wished on that particular score, but human rights and freedoms are not relative concepts. They're universal and indivisible. And all our countries in the Caribbean have signed on to that, and we say that this is what we believe in. There's also compelling consideration of whether the elusive notion of the public interest is adequately served by what we have. I am inclined to support the general principle that the public interest is not served when the otherwise underrepresented do not acquire a stronger voice or a more attentive audience. It is a shared responsibility involving all axes of public communication. In declaring a specific freedom relative to the work of the press, we nevertheless need to acknowledge a relationship between the rights and freedoms we insist upon and our responsibilities to the people, on the basis of whose interests we have asserted such rights. So yes, we want to be free to express ourselves, and we want to be free as media, but we assert that right only because it is deemed that we have this special relationship with our audiences and the people who are there to benefit from what we offer. And that to me is the space in which a notion of the public interest ought to prevail. There's also a broader universal context to be explored. The current state of media and their future direction, including what becomes of journalism in the Caribbean, is a subject that goes to the heart of an unfolding global human and technological revolution that has created new frontiers and new contexts in which people the world over are defining and interpreting their existence. What we are witnessing, in my view, and you young people are right at the heart of it, is a reformulation not only of the business of communication, but a transformation of the process of human communication itself. At one time, we in media marveled at the transition from mass broadcasting to selective narrowcasting through the introduction of digital technology. We were there saying, wow, digital technology has really revolutionized this thing, Where are we going? What next? Well, today what we are witnessing seems to be the emergence of a capacity by human beings to occupy a multiplicity of dimensions simultaneously through communication processes that are dramatically challenging prevailing notions of how information flows, relatively unmediated from person to person and from place to place. So all the communication theorists have to go back to the drawing board, because what we are dealing with is light years away from initial thinking of a linear process. And even when we move from the one-way flow, we spoke about the two-way flow, then to the multidimensional flow. But what we are talking about here is way in excess of that, because we are talking about people being able to occupy many dimensions at the same time. Now, the Canadian philosopher of communication theory, Marshall McLuhan, he wrote a book more than 20 years ago, and it's been updated constantly, called Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. And as I said, he wrote more than 20 years ago that after 3,000 years of explosion by means of fragmentary and mechanical technologies, the Western world is imploding. So move from explosion to implosion. During the mechanical ages, we had extended our bodies in space. Today, after more than a century of electric technology, we have extended our central nervous system itself in a global embrace, abolishing both space and time as far as our planet is concerned. Young people here will grasp that much more easily than us older fogies who thought about the world in 2 and 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions. What McLuhan essentially diagnosed is a condition in which human beings are moving from being mere witnesses to the explosion of technological development and its subsequent implosion to what I would describe as being resident at the epicenter of its detonation. We are no longer out there being struck by the fragments of the explosion, neither are we floating somewhere in between during the implosion. It is my view that we are now at the epicenter of the actual detonation. We are lighting the fire. We have the capacity to light the fire. And being in the Caribbean means absolutely nothing within the framework of what I'm talking about. Being small is absolutely irrelevant. Being remote has nothing to do with it. Being former colonies has nothing to do with it. We are at the epicenter of the detonation of this prevailing condition in which information is flowing and moving and being absorbed. We are both the subjects and objects of a process that challenges almost everything we previously held to be true. I would suggest that the Caribbean experience ought to have equipped us well for all of this. We should have been, or we should be, the least incapable to handle this. Born out of conquest, we are settlement, migration, bondage. Our raison d'etre has long embraced the notion of organic global integration. Nobody can train us about global integration. We are the product of global integration, of a process of globalization that started hundreds of years ago. That's how we found ourselves here. We are the product of that. We have long not only been in the world, but have had the world in us. Reared for the production of goods for markets far away, but ourselves the subject of a marketplace for people. A process that never really ended, if you think about it. As we witness even today, the production not only of goods and services for export, but people and the perspectives we bring. Sometimes we express this negatively in terms of a brain drain and in terms of the very rapid outflow of minds and ideas and people. But if we look at it from a global perspective, we are providing a level of fertilization of the world. And you can see that via the achievements, the long list of achievements of Caribbean people. Just a few weeks ago, we were looking at T20 cricket. We are the greatest in the world. The greatest in the... Do we understand that? And why? Well, because something with the sun or only the yam, the yellow yam? No, in my view, it is because the cumulative impact of how we came here and how we have survived this experience, what we had to do, the ideas we had to formulate, the way we relate to each other, that I think provides a clue. I mean, the sociologists will take that and mash that up and make something of it. But I think that we need to consider ourselves in that context. I think it is important for us to understand some of these things if we are to segue into how we handle media and what media mean and because what we are basically dealing with respect to mass media and the practice of journalism actually has to do with a distribution of power. That's why politicians, they love us and they hate us at the same time. And they move quickly from love to hate. Sometimes an election does it. You ever realize? They move from love to hate and then back to love. And they are friends, then you're enemies and so on. It is vital, understanding this is vital to the process of resolving the many different challenges we face as people who have traveled the highway of colonialism and independence and are now approaching the opportunity to achieve true liberation and a meaningful place in the world. An enlightened approach to the subject at hand ought to also realistically make an assessment of the pace and direction of the technological developments. I just cited McLuhan and his vision of the thing, which had to do with this intense sort of pace of development. But I think we need to temper that a little bit and to be very realistic about what we're dealing with. There's a view, for example,